Rachel had been my best friend since college. Her revelation at my bridal shower made me question whether I should go through with the wedding at all. I remember sitting there in my future mother-in-law's living room surrounded by pastel decorations and the soft chatter of 30 women who had come to celebrate my upcoming marriage. The afternoon sun streamed through the lace curtains, casting gentle shadows on the gift table that was piled high with wrapped boxes and elegant bags. I had been feeling overwhelmed for weeks, completely consumed by the endless details of wedding planning. Every conversation had become about venues, flowers, catering, and seating arrangements. My head was spinning with decisions about linens and centerpieces, and I felt like I was drowning in a sea of wedding magazines and vendor contracts. The shower had been going perfectly. We had played the usual games, eaten tiny sandwiches with the crusts cut off, and I had been opening gifts for what felt like hours. My cheeks hurt from smiling, and my voice was getting hoarse from expressing gratitude for each thoughtful present. The room was filled with the warm laughter of my closest friends and family members, and I should have been feeling nothing but joy. Instead, I felt this strange knot in my stomach that I couldn't shake. Rachel had been acting oddly all day. She kept checking her phone, fidgeting with her jewelry, and avoiding direct eye contact with me. When I caught her looking at me, she would quickly look away and busy herself with something else. I assumed she was just nervous about her maid of honor speech, which she had been putting off for weeks. She had always been a perfectionist, and I figured she was just anxious about speaking in front of everyone. The moment came when my aunt suggested it was time for speeches. My heart started racing as I watched Rachel stand up slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed down her dress. The room fell quiet and everyone turned their attention to her. She cleared her throat and looked around the room, her eyes landing on everyone except me. What happened next changed everything. Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper as she began to speak, but her words cut through the silence like a knife. She announced that she had been having an affair with my fiancé for 6 months. The room went completely silent except for the sound of someone's teacup clinking against a saucer. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs and my vision started to blur around the edges. She continued speaking, her voice getting stronger as she explained that she couldn't watch me marry him knowing the truth. The knot in my stomach exploded into a full-blown panic as she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She began showing text messages as proof, holding the screen up for everyone to see. The messages were explicit and detailed, discussing secret meetings and romantic encounters that had supposedly been happening behind my back. The reaction in the room was immediate and devastating. My aunt dropped her plate, sending cookies scattering across the carpet. My cousin started crying, and several guests began whispering frantically to each other. My mother's face went completely white before she buried her face in her hands and started sobbing. The sound of her crying was like a dagger to my heart, and I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. Rachel kept talking, saying she was prepared to lose our friendship but couldn't live with the secret anymore. She spoke about how guilty she had been feeling, how she had been losing sleep over it, and how she knew this would destroy our relationship but felt she had no choice. Her voice cracked with emotion as she described the weight of carrying this secret and how it had been eating away at her for months. I sat there frozen in my chair, unable to move or speak. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to grip the arms of my chair to steady myself. Everything I thought I knew about my life was crumbling around me. The man I was supposed to marry in 3 weeks had been betraying me with my best friend. The person I trusted most in the world had been lying to my face for months. I felt like I was going to be sick. The room was in complete chaos. Some guests were crying, others were angry, and a few were trying to comfort me while shooting dirty looks at Rachel. My future mother-in-law was frantically trying to clean up the mess from dropped food and drinks, her hands shaking as she worked. The beautiful afternoon that was supposed to be celebrating my future happiness had turned into a nightmare. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the front door burst open with a loud bang that made everyone jump. My fiancé came rushing in, but instead of looking guilty or ashamed, he was laughing. Actually laughing. The sound was so unexpected and inappropriate that it made the chaos in the room come to an abrupt halt. Everyone turned to stare at him in complete bewilderment. He looked around the room at all the shocked faces and crying women, and his laughter grew even louder. He walked over to Rachel and gave her a high five, which made absolutely no sense given what had just happened. Then he turned to me with the biggest grin I had ever seen on his face and revealed that this entire thing had been an elaborate prank. Update 1. The relief I felt was so intense that I thought I might actually faint. My fiancé explained that he and Rachel had been planning this whole thing for weeks because they had both noticed how stressed I had become about the wedding planning. He said I had completely lost my sense of humor and had been walking around like a zombie, obsessing over every tiny detail and forgetting to actually enjoy the process of getting married. He went on to explain that the affair evidence was completely fake. Rachel had spent hours creating fake text messages using some app she had downloaded, and they had even taken fake photos to make it look more convincing. They had been meeting in secret, but only to plan this ridiculous prank. The guilty looks, the nervous behavior, the phone checking, it had all been part of their elaborate scheme to mess with my head. The room was still in complete shock. My mother had stopped crying but was now staring at both of them like they had lost their minds. Several guests were looking back and forth between anger and confusion, not sure whether to laugh or storm out. My future mother-in-law was standing in the middle of the room holding a dustpan full of broken cookie pieces, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. Rachel started laughing too, and the relief on her face was obvious. She had been carrying the weight of this prank for weeks, and she later told me that she had almost backed out several times because she was so worried about how I would react. She said watching me open presents and smile at everyone while knowing what she was about to do had been torture. My initial reaction was pure fury. I had never been so angry in my entire life. The emotional whiplash of going from devastation to relief to rage was overwhelming. I stood up so fast that my chair fell over backward and I started yelling at both of them. I couldn't believe they had put me through that kind of emotional trauma as a joke. The humiliation of having 30 people witness what they thought was my fiancé's infidelity was unbearable. I stormed out of the room and locked myself in the bathroom, where I finally let myself cry. The tears were a mixture of relief, anger, and complete exhaustion. I could hear people talking loudly in the living room, probably trying to figure out what had just happened and whether they should leave or stay. The whole situation was surreal and embarrassing, and I couldn't believe the two people I trusted most had put me through this. When I finally came out of the bathroom, most of the guests had left. The few remaining family members were cleaning up the mess and whispering among themselves. My mother was still there, sitting on the couch looking shell-shocked. She had been crying so hard that her makeup was completely ruined, and she looked like she had aged 10 years in the span of an hour. My fiancé tried to approach me, but I held up my hand to stop him. I wasn't ready to hear his explanations or apologies yet. I needed time to process what had happened and figure out how I felt about it. Rachel was sitting in the corner looking miserable, probably realizing that their prank had gone too far and might have permanently damaged our relationships. The drive home was silent and tense. My fiancé kept trying to explain himself, but I wasn't in the mood to listen. I felt like I had been emotionally manipulated, and even though I knew it came from a place of love and concern, I couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a line. The fact that they had involved my family and friends in their scheme made it even worse. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the entire afternoon in my head, analyzing every moment and trying to understand how I had missed all the signs that it was fake. I was also trying to figure out whether I should be grateful that they cared enough to try to help me relax or furious that they had caused me so much pain in the process. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of text messages from friends and family members who had been at the shower. Some were checking to make sure I was okay, others were expressing their own shock and confusion about what had happened. A few of my more traditional relatives were scandalized by the whole thing and couldn't understand why anyone would think that kind of prank was appropriate. Update 2. The days following the shower were a blur of awkward conversations and damaged relationships. My mother was still upset, not just about the prank itself, but about the fact that she had been completely blindsided. She felt like she had been made to look foolish in front of her friends and sister, and she was having trouble forgiving both my fiancé and Rachel for putting her through that emotional trauma. My future mother-in-law was even more upset. She had spent weeks planning the perfect shower, and she felt like her efforts had been completely undermined by their stunt. She was also worried about what the other guests would think and whether the story would spread throughout their social circle. The humiliation aspect was really bothering her, and she was having serious doubts about whether my fiancé was mature enough to be getting married. I found myself in the strange position of defending the prank while still being angry about it. When family members would complain about how inappropriate it was, I felt compelled to explain that it had come from a good place, even though I was still processing my own feelings about it. It was exhausting trying to manage everyone else's emotions while dealing with my own confusion. Rachel and I had several long conversations over the next week. She was genuinely sorry about the whole thing and admitted that they had underestimated how traumatic it would be for everyone involved. She said they had been so focused on the end goal of getting me to lighten up that they hadn't really thought through the emotional impact of their method. She also revealed that she had been having doubts about the plan for days but felt like she couldn't back out because they had already committed to it. My fiancé was also trying to make amends, but his approach was different. He was less apologetic and more focused on explaining his reasoning. He said he had been watching me become increasingly stressed and unhappy as the wedding planning progressed, and he was worried that I was losing sight of what was actually important. He felt like I had become so obsessed with having the perfect wedding that I had forgotten about the marriage itself. The more we talked about it, the more I realized that there was some truth to what he was saying. I had been completely consumed by the wedding planning to the point where it was affecting my mood, my sleep, and my relationships. I had been snapping at people over minor details and spending entire weekends researching vendors and comparing prices. The joy had definitely gone out of the process somewhere along the way. But I still couldn't get past the method they had chosen to make their point. Creating fake evidence of an affair and humiliating me in front of my family and friends seemed like such an extreme way to handle the situation. I kept thinking about all the other ways they could have addressed their concerns without putting me through that kind of emotional torture. The wedding planning came to a complete halt. I couldn't bring myself to care about flowers or music or any of the other details that had been consuming my life. Every time I looked at my wedding dress hanging in the closet, I felt a mix of emotions that I couldn't untangle. Part of me was grateful that they had forced me to step back and reassess, but another part of me was still hurt and angry about their methods. 3 weeks before the wedding, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I called off the wedding. Not because I didn't love my fiancé or because I couldn't forgive him, but because I realized that I needed time to figure out who I was when I wasn't completely consumed by wedding planning. The prank had forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about how I had been handling stress and priorities. The reaction to my decision was mixed. Some people thought I was being too dramatic and that I should just forgive and move forward. Others thought I was being smart and taking control of my life. My mother was relieved because she said she had been worried about me for months but hadn't known how to bring it up. Rachel was devastated because she felt like their prank had backfired completely and caused the exact opposite of what they had intended. Final update. The months that followed were some of the most difficult but also most enlightening of my life. Calling off the wedding had been the right decision, but it came with a lot of consequences that I hadn't fully anticipated. We had to cancel vendors, return gifts, and have countless awkward conversations with friends and family members who had been planning to attend. My fiancé was initially angry and hurt by my decision. He felt like I was punishing him for trying to help, and he couldn't understand why I was throwing away our relationship over what he saw as a harmless prank. It took several weeks of difficult conversations for him to realize that my decision wasn't really about the prank itself but about the bigger issues it had revealed about our communication and my own personal struggles. Rachel and I went through a period where we barely spoke. The prank had damaged our friendship in ways that neither of us had expected, and we both needed time to figure out how to move forward. She was dealing with her own guilt about the situation, and I was still processing my feelings about being betrayed by my best friend, even though it had ultimately been well-intentioned. During this time, I started doing things I hadn't done in years. I took long walks without checking my phone, read books that had nothing to do with weddings or relationships, and spent time with friends I had been neglecting during the intense wedding planning period. It was like waking up from a dream and realizing how much of my life I had been putting on hold. I also started examining my relationship with perfectionism and control. The wedding planning had brought out some of my worst tendencies, and I realized that I had been using the event as a way to avoid dealing with some deeper anxieties about marriage and commitment. The prank had forced me to confront these issues head-on, even though the method had been traumatic and inappropriate. About 6 months after the canceled wedding, my fiancé and I started having regular conversations about what had happened and what we both wanted moving forward. He had used the time to reflect on his own behavior and realized that the prank, while well-intentioned, had been a terrible way to handle his concerns about my stress levels. He also acknowledged that he had been avoiding some difficult conversations about our relationship because he didn't want to add to my stress. Rachel and I also slowly started rebuilding our friendship. It was a long process that involved a lot of honest conversations about boundaries, trust, and communication. She had learned some hard lessons about the difference between helping someone and manipulating them, even with the best intentions. We both realized that our friendship had been somewhat superficial in recent years, and we committed to being more honest with each other moving forward. The most unexpected outcome of the whole situation was that it led to some positive changes in my family relationships. My mother and I started having more open conversations about stress, expectations, and the pressure to have perfect life events. She admitted that she had been caught up in the wedding planning excitement and had probably contributed to my stress without realizing it. We developed a better understanding of each other's perspectives and communication styles. A year after the canceled wedding, my fiancé and I decided to get married after all. But this time, we did it completely differently. We had a small ceremony with just immediate family members, followed by a casual backyard party with close friends. The whole event cost less than what we had been planning to spend on flowers alone for the original wedding. It was relaxed, fun, and focused on celebrating our relationship rather than impressing anyone or creating the perfect event. Rachel was my maid of honor again, but this time her speech was genuine and heartfelt. She talked about friendship, forgiveness, and the importance of being honest with the people you love, even when it's difficult. There were no pranks, no fake scandals, and no dramatic revelations. Just two people who had learned some hard lessons about communication and trust, surrounded by family and friends who had also grown from the experience. Looking back on the whole experience, I have mixed feelings about the prank and its aftermath. I'm grateful that it forced me to examine my priorities and make some important changes in my life. I'm also glad that it ultimately strengthened my relationships with the people I care about most. But I still think there were better ways to handle the situation, and I wouldn't recommend their method to anyone dealing with similar issues. The experience taught me that sometimes the people who love us most can hurt us the deepest, not because they want to cause pain but because they think they know what's best for us. It also showed me the importance of being honest about my own struggles and asking for help before things get to a crisis point. Most importantly, it reminded me that life is messy and unpredictable and that the best relationships are the ones that can survive the messiness and come out stronger on the other side. The bridal shower that was supposed to be a celebration of my upcoming marriage ended up being the catalyst for some of the most important personal growth of my life. It wasn't the story I had planned to tell about my engagement, but it turned out to be exactly the story I needed to live.